All right, so let's go ahead and get started. First, thank you everybody for joining us for our Ask Me Anything webinar today. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and replays will be made available on our YouTube channel as well as on TrustedSec.com. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, please make sure to ask them using the Q&A function at the bottom of the window. And with that, I'm going to hand everything over to our Incident Response Principal Security Consultant, Shane Hartman. So Shane, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you for having me today. I'm also joined by Steve Erwin. He's also a security consultant here at TrustedSec in the IR area, and he deals with business email compromise just like I do. So I'm actually going to be asking him a lot of the questions about what he sees on a day-to-day. So Steve, when we have a business email compromise, how is it that we even get the engagement? What did the client see first that gets even this whole thing started?
Yeah, so if anybody's unfamiliar with what a business email compromise is, it's essentially somebody gains unauthorized access into a mailbox, and they can do a variety of different things once they have that. They can request billing updates. We've seen requests for gift cards for C-suites, for gifts and a whole bunch of variety of different things. But once they kind of have that unauthorized mailbox access, they try to blend in. They do a bunch of different tactics and techniques to blend in and try to engage in essentially illicit conversations to help again either gain trust, gain financial gain, continue to spam other companies. So those are traditionally what BECs are. As far as how we get notified, a lot of these unfortunately come almost after the fact of payment has been made. I would say, a lot of times companies are calling us because they either were just about to wire money or have already wired some money, out to an incorrect bank account. We do thankfully have clients that catch them as well when they believe they're missing some email conversations. They're people are telling them they've sent them emails that they're not seeing them in their inbox, so things start to look suspicious that way. So there are some telltale signs that you could be potentially a victim of a business email compromise, but it does come down to some kind of diligence on the users, being able to identify things of that nature. So and again, for everybody listening, if you guys have any questions, please use the Q&A function, and we'll kind of answer those, as we go through as well. And Shane and myself are going to also talk about, some things that we see on incidents, some kind of gotchas and some things to keep in mind while also answering your questions as well.
Okay, so now that we know that maybe a business email compromise has occurred, the question always comes up, well, how did they get in, or what is their mechanism or their tactic? Is it just phishing, or is it something else?
Yeah, so for a long time, MFA or multi-factor authentication was kind of the silver bullet to stop a lot of these activities. Everybody said, roll out some type of multi-factor, and these no longer affect you. Recently we're seeing a lot more attacker in the middle attack. So attackers are leveraging some type of either phishing email or phishing campaign, or they're actually performing a business email compromise on a client, a supplier, a partner, again, somebody that you have gained trust with, to send you that email, so you click on that link. But with these attackers in the middle, they can supply a phishing link and actually, either take your credentials and your multi-factor in real time, or they do like a session stealing attack. So they can actually take your valid authenticated session with your multi-factor token and kind of play it as their own. So, those are the most common ways, especially with customers and clients who are running multi-factor authentication. The same still applies to people that are still not running multi-factor. It usually boils down to phishing, although we have seen some more advanced methods, but I would say probably not 90% of the time it's usually related to some type of phishing.
So the MFA itself's not like a panacea. It's not you put this in place and you get this set and forget kind of thing. There's actually more to it. That what kind of tools are the attackers kind of use to generate this sort of man in the middle thing? Do you know of any, or are you familiar with any? Like maybe I don't know the social engineering toolkit or something else that actually generates that. And then we do have a question about what software might prevent the phishing emails from occurring in the first place.
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer that question now. As far as prevention of the phishing emails, they're getting more and more advanced as these attackers are developing these new toolkits. For a long time there was a string of QR code phishing, which bypassed, to my knowledge, almost all of the mailbox prevention software because these attackers would send you a QR code letting you know that your multi-factor needed to be updated. And the first thing a user would do is pull out their personal cell phone that had, no company antivirus, no company monitoring, things of that nature, scan a QR code and log back in thinking that they were re-adding or re-authenticating their multi-factor authentication, when really they just essentially got phished and gave an attacker everything they needed to do to take over a mailbox. So, best software is kind of a paradox question. I wish I had it because I would bundle it and sell it and deal with it that way. But there's just a lot of there's a lot of different people out there that are doing some good stuff. Microsoft is making a large push with their in-house stuff. See a lot of good things about Proofpoint and a handful of others out there. But it really comes down to user training is the big one because like I said, if a supplier or a client falls victim to a BEC and they send an email to you and it's a normal person that you're having a conversation with and they send you a link, for a OneDrive or something, you may not think any of it and click on it and your inbox controls aren't going to catch that because it's a trusted person that you should be having communications with. It's somebody that you've emailed in the past, so when it gets like that, when it's a supply chain issue or something along those lines, they're a lot harder to detect. And we've seen more and more attackers using that, supply chain style attacks to dig deeper into companies. They'll get into company A, with a phish and immediately start attacking company B, with via trusted communications to attempt to get into them and work their way towards company C, D, and E. And those are the hard ones to detect because again, they're legitimate email addresses, they're illegitimate messages, but they're conversations that should normally be happening.
So I heard you say that Proofpoint and some of those, which are good for catching some of those. They're also probably introducing some AI type of technology to detect stuff that's going on there. But I also heard you reference more of the user awareness or user training. Phishing emails come in a variety of different forms. I mean, it could be something like a seminar post, or maybe it looks like it came from HR department, or even some kind of world event, like something that's going on, say, there was tornadoes this morning in Ohio that I heard, or there's something other world event like what happened in Taiwan with the earthquake, where they might ask or solicit for, say, a donation, but it's not really, it's a guise for some other way of getting money or whatnot. When those type of things come into play, it's more of that user awareness training that's gonna help you, not a specific tool. Is that kind of what I'm taking away from that?
Yeah, definitely. The famous saying there's no honor among thieves. There was a big uptick in this during COVID, and a lot of it was, hey, we have your COVID test results, and like it's morally, not a good thing to do, and you're essentially crafting emails that just about everyone potentially is going to click on, but to them, they know that's an email that somebody's going to click on. So, that's where that kind of user awareness comes in of like, hey, double check, messages that you're getting, things like that. Or, hey, if something seems suspicious, forward it off to like a security team to run through Sandbox or something like that.
Okay. So now we've talked about the first part. Let's kind of talk about how the engagement will kind of unfold when you're engaged at this point. What would be your kind of like your first steps? What things would you be looking for from the client? Maybe even asking what they've done already, or what information you're trying to collect to get your hands around what the engagement looks like.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback that to a question we just got that was asking us to explain our steps that we follow when handling a business email compromise and bottlenecks that we face in those. So, the first thing that we always do is, we start talking to the client, understanding, time frame, when it happened, what they think happened, affected users. And then, the next things that we always ask are, do you have your audit logs enabled? Because depending on when you created your, Microsoft 365 online account, auditing was not always on by disable. So you could have been in this weird limbo of users or users or tenant users that if you actually didn't enable that when you kind of spun everything up, it may not be on and it is not retroactive. So, that's kind of one of our first questions. Second question is license level. And you'll probably hear Shane and I reference this quite a bit with M365 and Office Online. License levels is a kind of a interesting dichotomy right now. It's unfortunately, from a forensic investigation side of the house, it's a pay to win. The higher or more expensive license level you have, the more readily accessible logs and relevant logs to an investigation that you have. So, the common license levels that are out there, or the most common are the E1s, E3s, and the E5s. And without getting too much into the weeds of the license level because it changes all the time. The big difference is between like the E3 and the E5 is the ability to see emails that were accessed by a user, and that's usually the first question that a company or a client asks us when we're working an investigation is what emails did a attacker have access to when they were inside this mailbox. And unless you're paying unfortunately, unless you're paying the top tier Microsoft license of E5, I do think there's some add-ons that go with that, maybe Security Plus or Premium Plus. I'm not a license level expert by any means, but the big one is, if you don't have that E5 license, those logs just don't exist. So, there's no ability to identify, what mail items were accessed or opened by an attacker or an illegitimate user. So, that question is nearly impossible to answer. There are some other tidbits of information out there that can help point to potentially what was accessed, but those logs just don't get written or saved off unless you're paying that top tier of license. Yeah, I will give Microsoft kudos. They are working towards standardizing log retention and things like that across the license levels now. That was also an issue kind of in the infancy of these, over the past couple of years. There were some big differences between data retention on E3s, E5s, and E1s, but I think they've made a push to help standardize that to help these users and things like that. So those would kind of be the biggest bottlenecks off the start. Is tenants where people have not enabled audit logging or the Exchange audit logs. And then unfortunately license level, just because we're not able to answer every question that the client usually asks us depending on the license level. And again, license levels aren't retroactive. So, you can't have, if Shane called us and said, hey, I think I was a victim of a business email compromise, he's an E3, you can't buy an E5 license on it. And then it gives you a history of, all those paywall logs. It's once you upgrade the license, it's that going forward. So yeah, go ahead.
How far back if once you turn on the licensing, whichever one, how far back do they go? What's the retention policy, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so the retention policy, to my knowledge, they're attempting to standardize it, but E3, which is kind of the most common license that we work with, is roughly about 90 days. And I do say roughly because there are some instances where they go back a little bit further, but I would say reliability wise, you're looking at about 90 days. So, that's potentially another bottleneck as well. Sometimes we don't get calls about a business email compromise until close to that 90-day mark, because it took a client a decent amount of time to figure out what was going on, because sometimes these aren't super apparent. They can fall victim to a phishing attack and kind of sit in the mailbox for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time, not really doing anything, and then kind of strike much farther down the road. And we have butted up against that 90-day time frame before.
Okay. So when you have a client calling you and asking questions, are they asking more on how it happened, or are they asking what did they do? Or is it a combination of both? I know the logging will tell you certain things, but clients have different kind of directions about what they're trying to solve. What problem is TrustedSec trying to solve for them, and what we can do?
Yeah, so before I kind of answer that one, I saw another kind of licensing question about business premium. I can't answer that for certain about business premium as far as where they fall into that. But there are some good sites out there that kind of map the license matrixy. But I do know a lot of stuff is currently changing, especially with some government involvement with Microsoft 365. So unfortunately, I'm not 100% on what business premium, where that falls into the E tiers of licensing. But if that is something that you're interested in, there are some matrix sites out there that will kind of overlap all the license levels on top of each other, and you can kind of see what you do get and what you don't get.
I passed the URL to the matrix back in an answer so that user can see that.
Okay. So then, yeah, kind of going back to your initial question with, what clients are asking for an investigation. It's usually both. The big question is, what did the attackers have access to? Because that could potentially bring in some type of legal ramifications, whether that's you're now a victim of a data breach, or if that person is in a specific area of business that could be handling finances or HR or even communications. If they're doing communications and they're handling potentially news that has not been publicly released yet. All that stuff could kind of open that legal door of now you've gone from a business email compromise to potential data breach or data theft. So that's usually the first question. And then, always in conjunction with that is, what did they have access to? And, the follow-up question is usually how did they get in, or things of that nature.
Okay. So now that you've been engaged or whatever, what kind of things are you asking for the client as far as, like, say, access, and what are you trying to pull and read to try to figure out what the attacker did? So what's those next steps in the process of actually doing the investigation?
Yeah. So, kind of once we're brought into an engagement, there's a couple key things that we're kind of looking for, and it's essentially signs of attacker activity. The first thing that attackers have kind of made a namesake for is creating some inbox rules. They will kind of shove those all over the places, and what they're doing with those inbox rules is, again, trying to mass legitimate email conversations to a spot where they know about, so the user can't see them. We see them get moved all over the place. That way they can reply. So the idea behind that is, again, if I was working with you, Shane, and I said, we were having a normal email conversation, and I got phished and fell victim to business email compromise. The attacker could go in and create an inbox rule that says, hey, anytime you see an email message from Shane, move that to a different folder that only I know about. That way when I re-access the mailbox, I can I can see your message and I can reply to you, but the legitimate user has no idea where that mail message has gone. And they do that for a variety of reasons. The big one is, again, if me and you are working, and say I'm buying some services or goods from you, I could update you and say, hey, by the way, I need you to pay this. We've updated our banking information. Can you please pay this instead? And if you don't have any other policies or procedures in place for, updating payment or, ACH or wire transfer money, if you're not doing a second level of check, if it's all done via email, you may just take that because it came from my legitimate account. It came in a normal email conversation. It's not like I created a new draft message or something like that. It was our existing email thread. And I, just casually said, hey, by the way, we've updated, some stuff on our side. Can you please pay this? Again, unless there's that second level of validation, a lot of people will go, yeah, no problem, and update it. And, it's as easy as that. Again, we've seen not only wire fraud and things like that. We've seen, as silly as it sounds, gift cards posing to be CEOs. If a CEO or a an administrative assistant or something falls victim to this, they'll reach out to somebody in finance and say, hey, I'm doing a quick meeting, I want to give everybody a couple $100 in gift cards. Can you run down to the nearest store, buy them for me? We'll take care of it and send me the codes. As silly as it sounds, if there's not that second level of validation, things like that work. And that's the idea behind these inbox rules is the ability to hide legitimate traffic, so they can kind of interject and change things that they want to change, or hide. We've seen them also hide emails where people are asking, hey, by the way, did you send this new email? And, again, if the inbox rule is doing its thing, that never hits the user. So, that's kind of where that user training comes into, making sure that, if Shane randomly reaches out to me and says, hey, I need you to update our payment method, maybe I pick up the phone and call Shane and say, hey, did you really want me to update this payment method? Or, did something happen?
So what we're starting to see is the attackers they're living on the mailboxes and monitoring things a little bit closer to real time than my first experience with Beck, with an actual forwarding email, was the inbox rule forwarded out. So it would forward to like a Gmail account or something like that. My understanding is Microsoft, or there's forwarding rules that are now in place that don't allow that as much. So now it looks like they're living right in conjunction with the user. So that gets back to the other part about how do you separate, say, the user from the attacker, and what activities and logs are you kind of looking at to make that distinction?
Yeah, so it's a lot of working with clients. When you get brought into these things, it's impossible, for me to know that, where your location is, where you should be logging in, where you shouldn't be logging in from. We tend to do that. A lot of that as well is looking at login authentications, kind of where they're coming from, looking for things that we would consider improbable travel, or risky sign-on behavior. So for example, if I logged in from Chicago and 45 minutes later I had a login from uh Norway or something like that, there's no means of real travel that could ever get me from Chicago to Norway in 45 minutes. So being able to sift through authentication logs and kind of plot out origins and IP addresses and kind of map out timeframes. When you start looking at it, a lot of these suspicious or risky logins kind of bubble to the top, because a lot of times when they're logging into these mailboxes, they're using off the shelf or commodity VPN providers, and there's no reason to correctly guess the country or state of origin, if you don't need to. So, you'll see people logging in from Chicago, and then, 15 seconds later, you see a random login from like London or something like that. That just doesn't, kind of fit into the user's kind of normal, user-based analysis type of stuff. So that is, definitely one tactic that we use. Again, looking for mailbox rules. Again, like you said, transport rules. Microsoft has kind of put some changes in to prevent, um, cross-domain transport rules. So again, if they were in Shane's mailbox and they were trying to forward off to a Gmail or something like that, Microsoft has put some checks in that, essentially kind of notify you if somebody's trying to forward mail out of a domain to a different domain. But those are kind of the big kind of investigation footholds. Anything I missed there, Shane, too?
No, not specifically. One engagement that I did have was the user was compromised, happened to be compromised while they were on vacation, and they were logging in at every hotel that they stopped at along the way. Unfortunately, we didn't know that at first, and it took a little bit of interviewing of the user to figure out in order to separate that, because we could see them in the case they were in Mexico. They were in Mexico, then they were in Texas, then Alabama, and they were kept going up the coast, and we thought it was the attacker. And the attacker was in the middle of that in North Carolina, was where we finally traced it down. And the only reason we were able to do that was because we had multiple sessions from one location, and the user was not at any one location more than one day. So it was one of those where it took a little bit of interview process and a little bit of sleuthing to kind of figure that out. And then we were able to pinpoint the attacker. But part of the way we did that was through the logging, specifically like sign-in activity. What other logs do we kind of look at when we're trying to pull and figure out what's going on between the attacker and user?
Yeah, we tend to pull a lot of tenant information as well. We see we've seen recently kind of a slew of cases where attackers will add their own authentication devices for multi-factor. So they can maintain access even after like a password change. If you're not clearing out any authentication, sessions or token sessions, we've seen attackers go in and, you'll go to a user account, for example, and you'll see, I'll pick on you again, Shane. You'll see like an iPhone registered, and it has, a registration date of a couple years ago, probably when the employee got hired, and that's their main two-factor. And then you'll see an Android device that has like a 2-week brand new registration, and you'll kind of reach out to the user and you're like, hey, do you use an Android device or anything like that? And they're like, no. And more than likely that was something that was added by the attacker, again, to essentially maintain multi-factor access. So it's more difficult to kind of identify that and root them out. We're also checking for OAuth applications as well, looking for haven't seen them as common recently with the man in the middle attacks, but there was a time there where attackers would use OAuth apps, using their stolen sessions to give apps essentially privilege on the account, and we've seen those for essentially cloning mailboxes. We've seen them for maintaining access. We've seen them do just about everything. There's a whole bunch of OAuth apps out there that, again, the big ones that we see are used to like clone mailboxes or pull all the mail messages off of a user's email. We've seen them where they give you, essentially read-write access to the account. So, they're accessing it through the OAuth app as opposed to, Outlook or the Exchange side of things. So, we're definitely checking those out as well, just to, validate that, during the investigation, there was nothing that was, added in that shouldn't have been added in.
Right. And OAuth was kind of popular there for a minute, but like you said, it's kind of dropped off a little bit. Has Microsoft changed their licensing a little bit on that, or how that works? I've noticed that they've been more restrictive about being able to put OAuth type of applications against a user or a tenant, for that matter. Have you noticed that, or is it just seems to be they're changing their tactics a little bit?
I think they're changing their tactics a little bit. I think OAuth, like any other essentially, application app store is kind of the Wild West when it first kind of, gets introduced to the public. And as more and more people understand, what these OAuth apps are doing, and how they get added into accounts, they got locked down a lot more. I will say a lot more clients are doing OAuth restrictions for end-based users. So if you're a normal user within a tenant, you may not have the chance to even install an OAuth application. So I think that helped drive attackers of getting away from OAuth and looking at other methods to gaining and maintaining access.
Okay. And we talked briefly earlier a little bit about going beyond the mailbox into other services and stuff that might be available to the user. I know we might use the unified audit log to kind of make those kind of determinations. How does that unified audit log play a role in figuring out where the attacker might have went to beyond the mailbox, say other Microsoft services that are exposed?
Yeah, the big ones that we see a lot are like SharePoint access and things of that nature, kind of going through the kind of Microsoft or the O365 tenant, your SharePoint, your mailbox stuff. Those are kind of the big ones that you can gain activity to. Again, some of that unfortunately boils down to license level access. Some of those things are hidden behind, that paywall of that E5 license. But that is kind of the big thing, is SharePoint and unified audit logs are kind of the big ones, and just a lot of piecing together kind of what happened.
So when you have the SharePoint and even the OneDrive, people don't realize that stuff might be exposed if an attacker were able to log in, say, through the portal, and what types of information or should like IT personnel be projecting to the user populace about what should and shouldn't go in maybe into a OneDrive. SharePoint's a little bit different because it has a different kind of, you at least can put an ACL on things, where I think OneDrive, it's assigned to the user and it's kind of open. They can share out from there. So there was one incident where I was working similar to that, where it was HR personnel and they had logged into their Salesforce information and downloaded a report from Salesforce and put it in their OneDrive, which exposed it to the attacker. When we were first projecting this and telling them about it, they said, hey, our SharePoints are not our SharePoint, our Salesforce is a SaaS. It's not even part of our infrastructure. How could they possibly get data out of it? And then we explained to them, hey, your user was able to get to it, pull a report which had proprietary information in it, and saved it to the OneDrive. And then we were able to determine that through the use of the unified audit logs and seeing that the attacker moved over and started accessing those. So those are like, what would you say would be something that you would kind of project out to your IT staff to say, these are the things that you need to communicate to your users on what maybe you should or shouldn't put into a OneDrive if it's exposed? I know that was a long-winded question.
Yeah, with that,
Or I can take part of it
yeah,
too.
if you want to take part of that real quick. Yeah, I'll kind of let you start and chime in.
Yeah, so my understanding is that you have OneDrive and then you have SharePoints, and OneDrive is assigned to at the user level. And like I said, you can download and you can put things in there just like what you would have in a traditional on-prem environment with home directories. People just would randomly store whatever data that they would use there and not think anything about it because the network team secured it and that was that. However, in this more cloud exposed environment, that's no longer the case. It's assigned to the user, but anybody who logs in as that user will immediately be able to see it because the portal that you log into, say portal.azure, you can see all the services that are exposed to that user, which includes not only SharePoint, but also the OneDrive, and they can just troll it. So then, like I said, turning that over to how to say to the user populace, you should be aware of what you're putting out there and what data exposures that you might have by doing this. Just more user awareness, I guess, where I'm going with that.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I've also worked a couple cases now where, attackers are really diving into SSO and single sign-on. So, like you said, if you're using your M365 credentials to log into Salesforce, I recently worked a business email, a compromise that started out as a business email compromise, but once the attackers had gained access to a mailbox, they had the creds and the multi-factor, they leveraged that to hop over to a Salesforce for the client that was also being used by the same single sign-on. So they had the M365 logon and then just hit the Salesforce single sign-on, and it popped them essentially right into the Salesforce where they were able to pull data off of that as well.
Okay. So when you get these emails, or when you pick stuff out of the mailbox itself, tell me about how you would leverage, say, like message trace or whatever, to figure out what the attacker might have sent, or what other mailboxes it might have went to, and even how you would investigate the email itself.
Yeah, so there's a couple different interesting things that we've seen attackers do. Going along with usually the client's request of what the attacker did, what they had access to, is we'll pull essentially, like you said, message trace logs, which are all the outgoing email messages from that user account, and that gives us a good idea of what that attacker was trying to do, whether they were trying to continue phishing other clients or companies, whether they were doing like I would say good old email spamming, just kind of sending out to everybody in contacts and things like that, again trying to phish more people, or were they trying to update billing information, or payment methods, things like that. So you can kind of pull down again the message trace, and this is where the time of attack and the timeline is key, because depending again on the type of user, these message traces, they could if they're again if they're in accounting or PR or something like that, they could be sending hundreds, 200 emails a day. So helping understand when the attack happened, and when what IP addresses and things like that, you can definitely correlate with the message trace to identify who else the attacker was reaching out to, and then that also allows you to reach out to them, to, if that's a vendor or an additional client, allows you to reach out to them to give them a heads up of, hey, we had a security incident, you may be targeted, things of that nature. But I would definitely, if that does happen, definitely run that by your legal team before you do any of that, yourself. All that needs to run through legal.
And we have a question that came in about, what would we suggest for business use to remedy situations with password reuse across domains? Because that does sometimes come up, especially if they don't have MFA. The passwords end up in lists, and they can brute force into the accounts, maybe more than one account, or like if they're posing here across multiple domains. How do you kind of remedy that kind of situation? And I'll think about it at the same time too.
Yeah, the first thing that kind of comes to my mind to remedy password reuse is some type of password management system, that would attempt to fix your password reuse issue, using something that a password management or a password wallet, something that you can give to the user and say, hey, all I need you to do is remember this one really good master password, and then kind of let the app generate all the individual passwords for you as you go forward. The other big thing that can assist with password reuse is obviously multi-factor authentication, but kind of as we talked about before, that isn't foolproof. The only other if you're looking for kind of a foolproof option, is to look at something like FIDO2, a YubiKey, passphrase, MFA. Look at something in the kind of FIDO2 realm. So far, to my knowledge, I haven't seen any BECs or phishings that have successfully done anything with FIDO2. But obviously this is a quickly changing landscape. So, please don't hold me to that in another couple months when something inevitably does happen. But for now it does look like, something in that FIDO2 landscape, YubiKeys, there's a couple other ones out there. Those seem to kind of be the best preventative way. So far everything else that we've talked about has been detection and investigation. But the true kind of preventative way so far is something like in that FIDO2 with YubiKeys or something along those lines.
So does the YubiKey, is that your MFA? How's architecturally kind of like that work? Are they two separate technologies, or are they one and the same? Like you do YubiKey, you don't do MFA, or vice versa? Help our the listeners kind of understand how that would fit in their architecture.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a ton of different FIDO2 out there. Essentially it's considered a no FIDO2 expert, but it's considered a passwordless authentication method. So
Okay.
essentially you can use your FIDO2 token and to authenticate into a mailbox. So you know what that does is it's usually some type of token that also is like a physical device. So it's not just a key that's being passed. You usually have to have some type of physical token or something along those lines to gain access into that.
Okay. So far what we've managed to talk about is how do Becks originally start with the phishing emails and how they possibly get in. We've talked about MFA, we've talked about preventative features, including like Proofpoint, and now we talked about FIDO2 and YubiKeys. Then we moved over into talking a little bit more about how we actually investigate those, including what the attackers have done, what they do on the mailbox as well as outside of it, accessing SharePoint and OneDrives, and some preventative things that we can do there. We've also talked a little bit about licensing and how all those pieces go together. So we've kind of covered quite a bit of the different pieces that go in there. But one area that we haven't explored here today is that when it comes to senior management, leadership, and like legal and HR type of ramifications when you have this. We talked a little bit about wire fraud, but that's only one aspect of it. If it's a mass email compromise or whatever, there could be some exposure as far as litigation. Maybe even the company might have a reputation hit or anything like that. When you've had to deal with these, when you've dealt with legal teams, what kind of questions are legal teams asking for, not only from TrustedSec, but even from the internal? And how's that part work out?
Yeah, so kind of before I dive into that,
Oh, I see a question. Yeah.
yeah, there's two questions that came in. There is, thanks Adam for sharing this one. There is a much longer list of FIDO2 token providers than YubiKey. Microsoft has a list of all their supported partners for FIDO2. So I'm just familiar with YubiKey because I have one sitting on my desk in front of me. But there is a handful of other providers out there that essentially are handling FIDO2. So it's you're not locked into just YubiKey. There's several other ones out there. And then somebody asked as well too about playbooks and how to practically implement them and what actions can be automated. And playbooks are definitely something that we recommend that clients have when looking at business email compromise or pretty much any other forensic incident, because a lot of times when these happen, it's never the most opportune time. Someone's on vacation, it's a Friday, something else is always going on. So it's nice to have some type of playbook in place. There are some things that we recommend having in your playbook, again mainly talking about your specific methodologies on pulling logs and doing your investigations. As far as specifically automating stuff into like a SOAR or something like that, that's all going to depend on kind of what logs you have and where you're sending your logs. So if you run a shop where you're running your own SIEM and you're already forwarding your M365 logs into there, or your unified audit logs, doing some automation is going to be way easier than a shop who, every time you have to do investigation, you have to go pull logs every time from Microsoft. So, there is unfortunately no standardized playbook, but the things I would say to keep in mind when kind of developing a playbook and looking at automation is, your logs, do you have to pull them fresh every time? Are you storing them somewhere? Do you have tools to do it? I will say the nice thing about pulling these logs is you can do it all from PowerShell. You can Google around. There's several tools that will do this all for you. And then the big thing is the actual analysis, which unfortunately can't quite automate. We in-house have some tools to help pull logs and aggregate them all together for us. But again, the analysis piece, the actual looking through the logs is something that, like anything with incident response, comes down to, kind of somebody looking through the logs, and trying to identify right from wrong. So, again, the playbook itself just really depends on, where your logs are at all times. Mainly if you have to pull them every time, or if you're putting them in something like an elk stack or a SIM or something like that.
But the other important thing about the playbooks is you got to kind of practice them a little bit so that everybody on your team, not only new people, but people who have been around a while, are aware of this, of the directions that you have to go. We've run into many organizations where they rely on institutional knowledge, where people just summarily know exactly what to do because they've been there for a long time. And they're the person that's inevitably on vacation or something at the time when the incident really occurs. So it's important to kind of work out those kinks about who you're supposed to talk to, what processes you're going to do, who's going to do what, and who's going to be responsible for communication. And then all the other processes as far as an incident analysis, remediation, containment, eradication, all those pieces. We had another question about anything about anti-spoofing solutions. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I don't know if...
I can't think of one off the top of my head either. There are some services. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are some services that will monitor for domain lookalike registration. So I'll pick on TrustedSec. So if somebody registered TrustedSec or Trusted Security or something on those lines in an effort to look like us, if you're paying for these services, they would notify you that, hey, somebody registered a lookalike domain, which could potentially down the road be used for phishing attempts. But yeah, I can't think of any kind of foolproof anti-spoofing solutions. A lot of the mailbox the email mail solutions, your defenders, your proof points, whoever else kind of falls into that category, they do offer some of that as well. They're looking at reputations and mail delivery and things like that, but there isn't a really good one, to just look at preventative of spoofing.
Now, when we do look at an email, we will pull down the actual email and try to analyze the headers, looking for, we can prove sometimes if spoofing is in place there, because we'll trace the route where the email originated from and what it went through, to see if it came from the location that we might have expected, if it looked like it was from a trusted source, but it turns out it's not. Because it'll fail sometimes, like the DMARC or the SPF. Those will say fail or it'll be false. I forget what the actual wording is. So that is one way we can tell whether or not it's been spoofed, but preventing it ahead of time, that's going to be the software that sits in front of your mailbox and on your mailboxes that will kind of do that. Like I said, I don't know of any specific solution other than what's intrinsic into the Microsoft and proof points and whatnot.
Yeah, and then I saw another question here as well, talking about successfully selling management to pay for E5 licenses or passwordless tools prior, to an incident. Um, the one thing I will say about E5 that I have heard success stories about is I'll give Microsoft kudos for this one. Licensing isn't straight across the board for a license level. So what I mean by that is, you could have you know, um, a marketing intern, be an E3 license, but you can make all your executives E5s, for example, or your VIPs or your people of interest that, if targeted, would be very detrimental to the company. You can definitely just purchase E5 licenses for them, and you can kind of run a split environment with mixed license levels, and Microsoft does support that. Again, still run into the intrinsic issue of if that, junior marketing person does get phished and has an issue, they still are stuck with an E3 license, and not that E5 license, which will make the investigation a little bit more difficult. But that is something where I have seen a lot of companies shifting more towards that methodology of, hey, we're going to run a standard E3 across the board for everybody, or even E1s for like interns or juniors or whatever have you. And then our VIPs, our most highly targeted assets, our the CFOs, our CEOs, our COOs, our legal people, those we're going to bump up to E5. And, because if something happens on those, the amount of access that they have and emails that they're seeing, it's critical for us to, know what emails were potentially accessed. So, I would definitely look at, potentially pitching that to, management of like, hey, why don't take kind of baby steps into it? Why don't we, look at E5 licenses just on
Your
these highly
critical one.
targeted individuals?
Yeah, that makes sense. It looks like we have one more question. See if we can. Well, we might have a couple. Have you seen any attackers circumventing the controls in CCM or CMMC level 1 or level 2 environment? I will say that I'm not as familiar with that, so I can't really speak to it. But I don't know if you can see.
No, I'm not familiar with that one as well, but I can do kind of a quick look here.
I do apologize.
Yeah, yeah, that, I'm not fully familiar with, the CMMC level 2 stuff. But so,
So
I can't answer that, but I will say that, we a lot of the controls that do get, I'll kind of answer more broadly. A lot of the I'll call them defense controls that do get implemented can help identify things. We always recommend looking at things uh, uh, like risky sign-ons, or identifying risky travel, things like that, where a lot of these features, again, with the correct license level, thank you Microsoft, is built into M365. But those will definitely kind of help in that first layer of defense, and those will find those really, as I would like to say, really easy to identify business email compromises. You have somebody in Ohio logs in, and then 35 seconds later, after they've gotten phished, you see a login attempt come from Russia or something like that. And, Microsoft does have that feature built in, albeit behind a certain license level, but, it will notify you, and, you can have it do some interesting things like, make them re-authenticate a multi-factor token when a risky sign-on happens, or, you can outright lock accounts sometimes and just say, hey, please call your administrator to unlock this account. We saw something funny happen. So, that is definitely is kind of my recommendation, is to look at those type of things. Again, unfortunately, there's a cost associated with that, and can't always, unfortunately, there isn't a free option, but those would be the best ones in kind of that defense that definitely would help these, I'll call them, the easy entry or easily identifiable BECs.
So I did do a quick look. It looks like it's related to cyber hygiene. Like I said, I'm not going to go into details about that specifically, but I will say that this does dovetail into like cyber insurance and those related type of activities. Because remember, if you're not doing good on your security side, the insurance company may deny your claim or may say that you're not practicing the right things that need to be done based on best practices, and then they won't pay out that insurance claim, whether it's wire fraud or whatever type of incident might occur there. So that again gets back into that legal cyber insurance type of realm, which is that last little area that we do have to deal with on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah, and then saw one last question come in talking about malicious app registrations and BEC related incidents. And yeah, we have seen that a handful of times. That usually is that goes back to that OAuth conversation that we were having. We'll see not so much anymore because now Microsoft allows you to restrict which users can actually install applications within the environment. But there was kind of a run there for a while where attackers were installing essentially overzealous permissioned OAuth apps that would essentially allow them to maintain access even after, password changes and things like that, because that's what the application allowed. So we don't see it too much now that Microsoft has changed some of their internal policies and security, but we did see those for a while.
Okay. I think that was last questions. We have a couple minutes left if anybody else has any last minute questions before we start to conclude for the day. Steve, do you have any other comments or things that you want to talk about specifically to business email compromise, how we analyze things, what logs we look at, processes and procedures, things of that nature?
No, I think we kind of covered everything that I could think of. Again, a lot of it, unfortunately, is a reactive investigation as opposed to a lot of proactive defense stuff. But kind of closing thoughts would be, verify you guys have audit logs on, Exchange audit logs are enabled as well. Validate your license levels, validate that logging has been turned on and all that fun stuff. And outside that, just constantly, train users and talk to users about, clicking on links and replying to emails and things like that.
And then I would also add to that is in addition to the logging or whatever, the preventative pieces that you can put into place, including user awareness training, YubiKeys if you can get them, MFA obviously. Also be aware of service account exposures that might be out in your Azure tenant, because they can log in as those too if they can get the account. Just those type of information to be aware of. Close those gaps as best you possibly can. And that way you don't have to be calling us for an actual business email compromise incident, because that's the best policy right there. You don't want to be in that situation where you have to actually call us. That being said, it looks like that's about all the questions that we have. I don't think I have anything else. I think that concludes what we have for today. We only have about 30 seconds left. I want to thank everybody for joining the webinar today, and I'm going to turn it back over to close out.
Yeah, no, just a special thank you to Shane and Stephen for a great webinar today. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Shane and Stephen directly. And with that, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys.